Welcome to Audiobook 365 Stories.
I stayed the night at Rush James's sheep farm by the sandy fork of the Nueces River. Mr. James and I didn't know each other before I arrived and said, "Hello," at his hitching post. But from then until I left the next morning, we were good friends, according to Texas customs. After dinner, Mr. James and I carried our chairs outside the small two-room house, onto its porch made of grass and bushes. We sat in our chairs, smoking tobacco, and chatting pleasantly about various things. Describing how beautiful the prairie evening was is hard. It's not easy to capture the charm of a Texas night in early spring. But I'll try to explain. The ranch was on top of a gentle slope. The open land, with its streams and patches of bushes, looked like a bowl around us. The sky was a deep blue, and the air smelled fresh because of the wildflowers. There was a bright round light in the sky, not the moon, but a sign that summer was coming. In the nearby pen, sheep were sleeping quietly, but sometimes they got scared for no reason and ran together. Coyotes howled, and birds chirped. The stars were so bright it felt like you could touch them. Mr. James's wife, a young and capable woman, stayed inside the house doing chores. We had dinner in one room. Then, suddenly, we heard beautiful music coming from the other room. The person playing the piano was very skilled. I was surprised to hear such good music in a small ranch house like this. Mr. James explained that he believes in enjoying the finer things in life, even if you live in the countryside. He thinks music can make life happier, especially for women who might feel lonely. I agreed and praised Mrs. James's piano skills, even though I'm not an expert. In the bright moonlight, I noticed a curious expression on Mr. James's face, as if he had something interesting to tell me. "You came from Double Elm Fork," he said. "You must have seen an old deserted house to your left." "Yes," I replied. "That's where this music idea started," said James. "Let me tell you about it while we smoke." That's where old Steve Adams lived. He had about 800 sheep and a daughter named Jennifer. She was as pretty as a new rope on a pony. Old Steve wasn't a famous sheep farmer. He was a small, old man with white whiskers who talked a lot. He wasn't even disliked by cowboys, which is unusual for a sheep farmer. But Jennifer was wonderful. She was good at taking care of the house. I lived nearby and often visited the Double Elm Ranch to see her. I liked her a lot, but she always put her father first. Old Steve knew a lot about many things, but he wasn't very sensible. He could talk about everything from the weather to politics to chemistry, but sometimes he didn't make much sense. One day, after shearing the sheep, I went to visit with a magazine about fashion for Jennifer and a scientific paper for old Steve. While I was tying my horse, Jennifer ran out, excited to share some news. "Oh, Rush," she said happily. "Dad's buying me a piano. Isn't that great? I never thought I'd have one." "It's wonderful," I said. "Piano will be nice company for you." "That's very kind of Uncle Steve." "I can't decide," said Jennifer, "between a piano and an organ. Both are nice." "Either would be great for a sheep ranch," I said. "I'd love to hear some music when I visit you." "Let's not talk about it now," said Jennifer. "Go inside. Dad's not feeling well today." Old Steve was inside, sick with a cold. I stayed for dinner. "I heard you're getting Jennifer a piano," I said to him. "Yes," said Uncle Steve. She's been wanting one for a long time. I'm going to buy her one with the money from selling the sheep's wool. I think she deserves it, I said. I'm going to San Antonio to pick one out myself, said Uncle Steve. Wouldn't it be better to take Jennifer with you so she can choose? I asked. That suggestion made Uncle Steve upset. He thought he knew everything and didn't like the idea that someone might know better. No, sir, it wouldn't, he said, tugging at his white whiskers. I know more about musical instruments than anyone. I had an uncle who worked in a piano factory, so I've seen many of them being made. From pipe organs to homemade fiddles. I know them all. Just pick what you like, Dad, Jennifer said, unable to contain her excitement. You know best. I'll be happy with whatever you choose. I once saw something Steve led an orchestrion in St. Louis, Uncle Steve said, and I thought it was the best musical invention ever, but it's too big for our house and it probably costs a lot. I think a piano would be best for Jennifer. She took lessons for 2 years in Birdstail. I wouldn't trust anyone else to pick out an instrument. If I hadn't become a sheep farmer, I might have been a great composer or piano maker. That was Uncle Steve's way of talking. But I didn't mind because I knew how much he cared for Jennifer, and she felt the same way about him. He sent her to school in Birdstail for 2 years, even though it was expensive. Around Tuesday, Uncle Steve went to San Antonio on the last wagon load of wool. Jennifer's Uncle Ben, who lived nearby, came to stay with us while Uncle Steve was away. It was about 90 miles to San Antonio and 40 miles to the nearest train station. So Uncle Steve was gone for about 4 days. I was at the Double Elm when he came back one evening at sunset. And in the wagon, wrapped in wool sacks with a sheet tied over it, was a piano or an organ. We couldn't tell which. And Jennifer jumped out, shouting, "Oh, oh," with excitement. Dad, Dad, Steve let out. Did you bring it? Did you bring it? As if it wasn't right in front of her eyes. Finest piano in San Antonio, Uncle Steve said proudly, waving his hand. Made of rosewood, with the best, loudest sound you've ever heard. I heard the storekeeper play it, and I bought it on the spot with cash. We, along with Ben and a Mexican helper, unloaded it and carried it into the house, placing it in a corner. It was an upright piano, not very heavy or large. Then suddenly, Uncle Steve collapsed, saying he felt very sick. He had a high fever and complained about his lungs. He went to bed while Ben and I tended to the horses, and Jennifer rushed to prepare something hot for Uncle Steve to drink. But before that, she hugged the piano with a soft smile, like children do with their toys on Christmas. When I returned from the pasture, Jennifer was in the room with the piano. I could see that she had unwrapped it, but now she was covering it again with the sheet, her face looking solemn. "Are you wrapping up the piano again, Jennifer?" I asked. "Why not play a couple of tunes to see how it sounds?" "Not tonight, Rush," she said. "I don't feel like playing tonight. Dad's too sick. And think, Rush, he paid $300 for it. Almost a third of what we got for the wool." "Well, it's not even close to a third of what you're worth," I told her. "And I don't think Uncle Steve is too sick to hear a little music from the piano." "Not tonight, Rush," Jennifer said firmly, in a way that meant she had made up her mind. But it turned out that Uncle Steve was really sick. He became so ill that Ben rode to Birdstail to fetch Doc Simpson. I stayed around in case I was needed for anything. When Uncle Steve's pain eased a bit, Steve led Jennifer over and asked her, "Have you seen your instrument, honey? Do you like it?" "It's beautiful, Dad," she said, leaning down by his pillow. "I've never seen one so pretty. It was so kind of you to buy it for me." "I haven't heard you play it yet," Uncle Steve said. "My side doesn't hurt as much now. Could you play something, Jennifer?" But she put him off, steving him down like women do with children. It seemed she had decided not to touch the piano for now. When Doc Simpson arrived, he told us that Uncle Steve had a severe case of pneumonia. Given his age and frailty, the chances of recovery weren't good. On the fourth day of his illness, Uncle Steve led for Jennifer again and wanted to talk about the piano. Doc Simpson, Ben, Mrs. Ben, and I were all there doing what we could. "I could have been very successful in anything related to music," Uncle Steve said. "I bought the best instrument for the money in San Antonio. Isn't the piano perfect, Jennifer?" "It's absolutely perfect, Dad," she said. "It has the most wonderful sound. But don't you think you should rest now, Dad?" "No, I don't," Uncle Steve insisted. "I want to hear that piano. I don't believe you've even played it yet. I went all the way to San Antonio to pick it out for you. Cost a third of the wool earnings, but I don't mind if it makes my good girl happier. Could you play a little for me, Jennifer?" Doc Simpson signaled Jennifer to do as Uncle Steve wished, hoping it would steven him down. Her Uncle Ben and his wife also encouraged her. "Why not play a few tunes softly?" I suggested. "Uncle Steve has asked you so many times. It would mean a lot to him to hear you play on the piano he bought for you. Don't you think you could?" But Jennifer stood there, tears streaming down her face, saying nothing. Then she ran over and hugged Uncle Steve tightly. "Last night, Dad," we heard her say, "I played it a lot. Honestly, I played it. It's such a wonderful instrument, and I love it so much. I played Bonnie Dundee, the Anvil Polka, the Blue Danube, and many others. You must have heard me playing a little, right, Dad? I didn't want to play loudly when you were so sick." Well, Uncle Steve said. "Maybe I did hear it. Maybe I did and forgot about it. My head is a bit foggy sometimes. I heard the man in the store play it well." "I'm very glad you like it, Jennifer." "Yes. I think I could sleep for a while if you stay with me until I do." That's where Jennifer had me puzzled. As much as she cared for Uncle Steve, she wouldn't play a single note on the piano he bought her. I couldn't understand why she told him she had been playing it, as the sheet had never been taken off since she put it back on the day it arrived. I knew she could play a bit because I had once heard her play some decent dance music on an old piano at Charco Largo Ranch. Well, after about a week, Uncle Steve succumbed to pneumonia. They held the funeral in Birdstail, and we all attended. I brought Jennifer back home in my buckboard. Her Uncle Ben and his wife planned to stay with her for a few days. That night, Jennifer took me into the room where the piano was, while the others were on the porch. "Come here, Rush," she said. "I want you to see this." She untied the rope and removed the wagon sheet. If you've ever ridden a saddle without a horse, fired an empty gun, or taken a sip from an empty bottle, then you might have been able to coax a tune or two out of the instrument Uncle Steve had bought. Instead of a piano, it was one of those machines they've invented to imitate the piano. On its own, it was about as musical as the holes of a flute without the flute. And that was the piano Uncle Steve had chosen, with the good, fine, genuine girl standing by it, never letting him know. And what you heard playing earlier, Mr. James concluded, was that same pseudo-piano machine, although now it's placed next to a $600 piano that I bought for Jennifer as soon as we got married.